dining room was bathed in warm amber light, creating shadows that danced across the polished oak table as my mother-in-law, Eleanor, adjusted the centerpiece for the third time. Her perfectly manicured nails, painted a deep burgundy to match her blouse, clicked against the crystal vase holding an arrangement of lilies and roses. Flowers I was allergic to, a fact she'd been reminded of countless times. "Sarah, dear," she called out without looking at me, "these water glasses simply won't do. Don't you have any proper crystal? James grew up using Waterford." I bit my tongue, a skill I'd perfected over the 5 years of my marriage to James. "The crystal is packed away," I lied, knowing full well the set she'd gifted us last Christmas was deliberately stored in the attic. I couldn't bear to look at them after she'd announced to everyone at our holiday gathering that they were to help Sarah finally set a proper table. "Well, that's unfortunate," she sighed, the disappointment in her voice as sharp as glass. "I suppose these will have to do for tonight." Tonight, the monthly family dinner that had somehow migrated from rotating between family members' homes to being permanently hosted at our Victorian townhouse in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. A house with history, character, and the kind of old-world charm that Eleanor coveted but couldn't afford after her husband's business went under 15 years ago. I smoothed my hands over my apron, trying to calm the nervous energy that always surfaced before these gatherings. The pot roast was almost done, the vegetables roasted to perfection, and the apple pie, James's favorite, cooling on the counter. Everything needed to be perfect. It always did when the Harrington family assembled. "Mom, do you need any help?" James appeared in the doorway, his tie perfectly knotted, his blonde hair combed back in the way his mother preferred. At 35, he still sought her approval in ways that made my heart ache. "Everything's fine," I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Your father's whiskey is on the bar cart in the living room. Perfect. He's been talking about work all day, so he'll need it." James crossed the kitchen and planted a quick kiss on my cheek, his cologne, a Christmas gift from his mother, lingering in the air. "You've outdone yourself again, Sarah." I wanted to believe him, to feel appreciated for the hours I'd spent preparing, but the way he glanced at his mother for confirmation told me whose opinion truly mattered. Eleanor gave a slight nod, the closest thing to approval I'd receive. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of James's sister, Olivia, her husband, Richard, and their 2 children, Emma and Liam. Unlike Eleanor, Olivia had always been kind to me, though our relationship remained surface level, constrained by the family dynamics that positioned me as an outsider. "Aunt Sarah." Emma rushed in, her 7-year-old energy filling the space with light. "I made you something at school." She thrust a hand-painted ceramic bowl into my hands, beaming with pride. "It's beautiful, Emma," I said, genuinely touched. "I'll use it for my jewelry on my nightstand." "Mom says you don't wear much jewelry," Emma said innocently, causing Olivia to flush with embarrassment. "Emma, that's not... It's fine," I assured her, though the comment stung. Another reminder of how I was discussed when I wasn't present. James's father, Robert, emerged from the living room, tumbler in hand. "Something smells good in here," he announced, his imposing figure filling the doorway. Though retired, Robert Harrington still carried himself with the authority of the CEO he once was. "Sarah, you've outdone yourself." "Thank you, Robert," I said, feeling a small glow of satisfaction. Unlike Eleanor, Robert had always been more accepting, though he rarely intervened when his wife's criticisms became cutting. Dinner proceeded as it always did. Eleanor dominated the conversation, steering it toward topics that highlighted family achievements while subtly undermining my contributions. James, eager to please his mother, often joined in, unaware of how each comment pierced my heart. "James tells me you've taken another leave of absence from the foundation," Eleanor said, cutting into her roast with surgical precision. "Such a shame. That position was quite prestigious." The foundation in question was the Harrington Family Foundation, established with the remnants of Robert's business assets. I'd worked there briefly, heading up their educational outreach program, until Eleanor, who chaired the board, had made it impossible to continue. "It wasn't a leave of absence," I corrected gently. "I've accepted a position with the Children's Literacy Initiative, a job I was passionate about, working with underprivileged schools to improve reading programs." "How charitable," Eleanor replied, the word dripping with condescension, though I imagine the salary is quite a step down. "Money isn't everything, Mom," Olivia interjected, throwing me a sympathetic glance. Of course not, dear. But security is important, especially when one doesn't come from it. Eleanor's gaze fixed on me, a reminder of my middle-class upbringing that she found so distasteful. I felt James tense beside me, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he changed the subject. Dad, how's the new board member working out? Harrison's son, right? The conversation shifted, and I retreated into silence, pushing food around my plate. The evening continued, tension building within me like pressure in a sealed container. After dinner, as I served coffee and pie in the living room, Eleanor delivered the blow that would finally crack my composure. James, darling, your father and I have been thinking, she began, setting her coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. This house is much too large for just the two of you, especially with Sarah's reduced income. James leaned forward, interested rather than defensive. What do you mean, Mom? Well, with the housing market as it is, you could sell this place for a fortune. You could move into something more sensible and perhaps invest the difference. Eleanor smiled, her plan clearly long in the making. In fact, Richard's firm just listed a lovely condo in Cambridge. Richard, caught off guard, nodded uncomfortably. It's a nice property, yes. Or, Eleanor continued, her voice sweetening, you could consider renting out the third floor to us. Your father and I have been thinking of downsizing from the Wellesley house, and it would be so lovely to be closer to you and the grandchildren. The room fell silent. Olivia stared at her mother in disbelief, while Robert examined his whiskey as if it held some escape from this conversation. That's actually not a bad idea, James said slowly, turning to me with excitement in his eyes. What do you think, Sarah? It would help with the mortgage, and Mom and Dad would be right upstairs. Something inside me snapped. 5 years of swallowed responses, of accommodating Eleanor's thinly veiled insults, of watching James choose his mother's approval over my feelings. It all came rushing to the surface. There is no mortgage, James, I said quietly. He blinked, confused. What do you mean? Of course there is. No, I continued, setting down my coffee cup with a steady hand that belied the trembling inside. There isn't. And your parents won't be moving into the third floor because I won't allow it. Eleanor's face hardened, her mouth forming a tight line. I don't think this is an appropriate conversation for... It's exactly the appropriate conversation, I interrupted, standing up. James, I need to speak with you in the kitchen. Now. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, feeling the weight of their stares on my back. In the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the meal I'd prepared to please a family that would never accept me, I waited for my husband, wondering if this would be the moment that changed everything. James entered the kitchen, his expression caught between confusion and irritation. The sounds of murmured conversation from the living room created a tense backdrop to what I was about to reveal. Sarah, what's going on? You can't just walk out like that when my mother is... When your mother is what, James? Planning our lives? Deciding where we should live and who should live with us? My voice remained low, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Did you ever once consider asking me before entertaining the idea of your parents moving in? He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, messing it up in a way that made him look younger, more like the man I'd fallen in love with before Eleanor's influence had strengthened its hold. It was just a suggestion, Sarah. Mom's right. This place is too big for us, and the extra income would help now that you're taking a pay cut. There's no mortgage, James, I repeated, leaning against the counter for support. There never has been, not since we moved in. His brow furrowed, the confusion genuine. What are you talking about? We make payments every month. I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to shatter the careful facade I'd maintained for years. Those payments go into an account. I set it up when we moved in. It's been gathering interest, meant to be a surprise for when we decided to start a family. I don't understand. James shook his head, denial written across his features. We signed paperwork. We got a loan. No, James. You signed paperwork that I prepared. There was no loan. I moved to the drawer beside the refrigerator, pulling out a folder I'd kept hidden beneath kitchen towels, a place I knew neither James nor Eleanor would ever look. This house belongs to me. It has since before we met. I handed him the deed, watching as his eyes scanned the document, widening as comprehension dawned. This is dated 7 years ago. We've only been married for 5. It was my grandmother's, I explained, the words tumbling out now that the secret was exposed. She left it to me when she passed away. I was renovating it when we met. Remember how I said I was staying with a friend because my place was being remodeled? This was my place, James. It's always been mine. The color drained from his face as he looked up from the document. Why didn't you tell me? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times over the years. At first, it was because we were new, and I didn't want you to think I was showing off or that I expected you to move in. Then, when things got serious, it was because I saw how your mother treated me, like I wasn't good enough, like I came from nothing. My voice caught, emotions threatening to overflow. I wanted to be accepted for who I was, not what I owned. So you lied, James said flatly, setting the deed on the counter. For 5 years, you've let me believe we were building something together, when really, we were building something together, I insisted, reaching for his hand, which he pulled away. Our marriage, our life, the house is just a structure, James. A structure you let my mother criticize you for not maintaining properly. A structure you let her believe we struggled to afford. His voice rose, tinged with a betrayal I had anticipated but couldn't fully prepare for. Do you know how many times I've defended our financial decisions to my parents? How many times I've assured them we were doing fine when they offered to help? And do you know how many times I've sat silently while your mother belittled my taste, my background, my career choices? I countered, years of suppressed hurt surfacing. How many times I've watched you nod along when she suggested I wasn't contributing enough? The kitchen door swung open before James could respond, revealing Eleanor's rigid form. Her eyes darted between us, then fixed on the deed lying on the counter. "What's going on here?" she demanded, stepping fully into the room. "We can hear you from the living room." James stared at me, a silent challenge to explain myself to his mother. When I remained quiet, he picked up the deed and held it out to her. Apparently, Sarah owns the house. Has owned it since before we met. There is no mortgage. Eleanor took the document, her reading glasses appearing from her pocket as she scrutinized it. The kitchen filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock above the stove. Another family heirloom from my grandmother. "I see," she finally said, her voice unnaturally calm. "And you've been deceiving James about this for the entirety of your marriage." "I haven't been deceiving him," I defended, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. I was protecting myself. From what, exactly? Eleanor's question was razor sharp. "From this," I gestured around us, at the tension-filled kitchen, at the family gathering that had devolved into confrontation. "From being valued for what I have rather than who I am. From having my home, my grandmother's home, treated as an asset to be liquidated or divided up according to your preferences." Eleanor's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Oh, Sarah, if you think this little revelation changes anything, you're sorely mistaken. James is a Harrington. This deception only proves what I've always suspected about your character, Mother," James warned. But Eleanor continued, emboldened by my confession. "No, James. She's hidden this from you, from all of us. What else might she be hiding? And to think, all those conversations about family trust and transparency." She turned to me, her expression triumphant. "You sit in judgment of our family dynamics while building your marriage on lies." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I had withheld information, had allowed James to believe we were financial equals when I had this significant asset. But the alternative? Watching Eleanor's treatment of me transform from condescension to calculated interest had seemed worse. "You're right," I admitted, surprising both of them. "I should have told James the truth from the beginning. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry." I looked directly at my husband, whose face remained unreadable. "But I'm not sorry for protecting my home from becoming another piece of the Harrington family portfolio. I'm not sorry for wanting to be loved for myself, not for my property." "How very noble," Eleanor sneered. "James, we should go. Clearly Sarah has much to explain, and I don't think our presence is helping matters." For a moment, I thought James might side with his mother, might leave with his family and not return. The possibility sent a wave of panic through me, stronger than I'd anticipated. Despite the tensions, despite the constant navigation of Eleanor's disapproval, I loved my husband. The thought of losing him over this felt suddenly, achingly real. But James surprised me. No, Mom. Sarah and I need to talk, but this is between us. You and Dad should head home. I'll call you tomorrow. Eleanor's eyes widened, unused to being dismissed by her son. James, I hardly think now is the time for you to be alone with someone who has been so deliberately deceitful. She's my wife, James said firmly, a note of finality in his voice that I rarely heard. And this is her house, as it turns out. I think we're entitled to some privacy. The shock on Eleanor's face would have been satisfying under different circumstances. She looked from James to me, then back again, searching for the compliant son who would follow her lead. Finding him gone, replaced by a man standing his ground, she straightened her shoulders and handed the deed back to James. Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your father and I will see ourselves out. Olivia and her family as well. After she left, the kitchen felt both emptier and somehow less suffocating. James and I stood facing each other, the deed between us on the counter, the truth finally laid bare. You should have told me, he said after a long silence. I know, not just about the house, but about how my mother made you feel. About how I made you feel when I didn't stand up for you. His voice was thick with regret. I always thought I was keeping the peace, but I was really just avoiding conflict at your expense. It was an admission I'd longed to hear for years, one that made my heart swell with a cautious hope. I should have been honest about all of it, I acknowledged. But James, your mother has never approved of me, has never thought I was good enough for you. Finding out I owned this house wouldn't have changed that. It would have just given her a different reason to disapprove. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. She would have said you trapped me, or that you were showing off, or... Exactly, I interjected, relieved he could see it. There was no winning scenario with Eleanor. There never has been. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, signaling the departure of the last of our guests. James moved to the window, watching as his family retreated down the street, his father's arm around his mother's rigid shoulders. What happens now? I asked, the question hanging between us, weighted with possibility and fear. James turned back to me, his expression softening. Now we talk, really talk, about everything we've been avoiding, and then we decide what we want our life to look like. Not what my mother wants, not what your fears dictate, but what we want, together. It wasn't a resolution, not yet. There were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt on both sides. But as we moved to the living room, leaving the remnants of the disastrous dinner behind, I felt something I hadn't in a long time when it came to my marriage. Hope. The week following what we came to call the Revelation Dinner was a blur of intense conversations, tears, and cautious reconciliations. James and I circled each other in the house. My house, as we both now acknowledged. Like wary dancers learning new steps to an old song. I keep thinking about all the times I complained about the property taxes. James said one evening as we sat in the garden, the spring air cool but not uncomfortable. You must have been laughing inside. I shook my head, watching a sparrow hop along the stone path. I wasn't laughing, James. I was terrified that if I told you the truth, everything would change. It has changed, he pointed out, not unkindly. But maybe it needed to. He was right. The foundation of our marriage had shifted, revealing cracks we'd both pretended not to see. James's relationship with his mother had cooled considerably. He'd taken my side for perhaps the first time in our marriage, and Eleanor wasn't handling the betrayal well. She'd called daily at first, her messages oscillating between concerned and cutting, until James had finally told her he needed space. I never realized how much I defined myself through her expectations, he admitted during one of our late-night talks. It was easier to try to meet them than to figure out what I actually wanted. And what do you want now? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. He'd taken my hand then, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I want us to start over. I want to be the husband you deserve, not the son my mother created. It was a beautiful sentiment, but we both knew the reality would be more complicated. Years of patterns couldn't be broken overnight, and Eleanor wasn't likely to relinquish her influence without a fight. That fight came sooner than expected, on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after the dinner. The doorbell rang while James and I were sorting through old photographs, a project we'd started as a way to reconnect with each other's histories. "I'll get it," I offered, setting aside a stack of pictures from James's college graduation. I opened the door to find Eleanor standing on the porch, alone and impeccably dressed in a powder blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary at the Literacy Initiative. "Sarah," she greeted me, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "May I come in?" Every instinct told me to refuse, to protect the fragile peace James and I had been building. But I stepped aside, allowing her into the foyer of the home she'd criticized so often. "James is in the living room," I said, leading the way, though I was certain she remembered the layout perfectly. James looked up as we entered, surprise flashing across his face before he composed himself. "Mom, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Eleanor replied, taking in the scattered photographs and the casual Sunday attire we both wore. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but you haven't been returning my calls, and there are matters we need to discuss." James sighed, setting aside the photo album. "Mom, I told you I needed time. Time is a luxury, James, especially when it comes to family matters." Eleanor remained standing, her handbag clutched in front of her like a shield. "Your father is distraught. Olivia is confused. The family is falling apart because of this situation." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the anxiety that always accompanied Eleanor's presence intensifying. But something was different now. I was different. This was my home, my safe space, and I refused to be made to feel like an intruder in it. "Eleanor," I said calmly, "if you've come to continue the argument from dinner, I'm afraid you're wasting your time. James and I are working through things together." Her gaze shifted to me, assessing. "Actually, Sarah, I've come to apologize." The statement was so unexpected that both James and I stared at her in disbelief. "I've had time to reflect on my behavior," Eleanor continued, her voice carefully modulated. "It was wrong of me to suggest selling your home or moving into it without consulting you. It was presumptuous and inconsiderate." It was an apology of sorts, though it neatly sidestepped her years of subtle undermining and overt criticism. I glanced at James, who appeared equally skeptical of his mother's sudden contrition. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," he responded cautiously. "It means a lot." Eleanor smiled, a practiced expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Family is everything to me, James. You know that. I would never want my enthusiasm for involvement to damage our relationship." She turned to me then, extending an olive branch so thin it was practically transparent. "Sarah, perhaps we could start fresh. Now that everything is out in the open, there's no reason we can't move forward with honesty and mutual respect." I wanted to believe her, for James's sake, if not for my own. But years of experience had taught me to look beyond Eleanor's words to her intentions, which usually served her own interests above all. "I appreciate that, Eleanor," I said carefully. "Honesty and respect are exactly what I've always wanted from our relationship." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. "Wonderful. Then you won't mind if I speak honestly now." She finally took a seat, arranging herself on the antique sofa that had once belonged to my grandmother. "I've been consulting with our family attorney about the implications of your arrangement." And there it was, the real purpose of her visit. "What arrangement would that be, Mother?" James's voice had cooled considerably. "The house, of course." Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. "In Massachusetts, assets acquired before marriage remain separate property, but any appreciation in value during the marriage would be considered marital property in the event of a divorce." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Divorce. It hadn't been mentioned once during our weeks of difficult conversations, not even as a hypothetical. "No one is getting divorced," I stated firmly, anger rising at Eleanor's presumption. "And even if we were, I wouldn't be interested in quibbling over property values." "That's very noble, Sarah, but naive." Eleanor's condescension was back in full force. "James has contributed to the maintenance and improvement of this home for 5 years. That creates equity." James stood abruptly, his patience visibly fraying. "Stop it, Mom. Right now." I didn't ask you to consult attorneys, and I don't appreciate you coming into our home and discussing divorce as if it's inevitable. I'm only trying to protect you," Eleanor insisted, her facade of apology completely abandoned. "She kept this enormous asset secret from you for years, James. Who knows what else she might be hiding, what her true motivations might be. I'd heard enough. Years of biting my tongue, of making allowances for Eleanor's behavior for James's sake, had left me with a well of patience. But that well had run dry. My motivation, Eleanor, was loving your son," I said, standing to face her directly. "It has always been that simple, not his family name, not his connections, and certainly not any financial considerations. Just James, the man I fell in love with despite, not because of, his family." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a flash of something, hurt, perhaps, or simply anger at being challenged, crossing her features. "Love doesn't pay bills or secure futures, Sarah. Neither does interfering in your adult son's marriage," I countered. "James and I have issues to work through, yes. Trust that was broken on both sides. But we're doing that together, without attorneys, and without treating our relationship like a business transaction to be dissolved." James moved to stand beside me, his presence a solid reassurance. "Mom, I think it's time for you to go. We appreciate your concern, but Sarah's right. This is between us." For a moment, I thought Eleanor might argue further, might dig in her heels as she so often did when challenged. Instead, she stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "I see I've overstepped," she acknowledged, though there was no real remorse in her tone. "But James, when emotions cool and reality sets in, remember that family will always be there for you. Always." The implication was clear. I was temporary. The Harringtons were forever. It was the same message she'd been sending since James and I had first started dating, that I was an outsider, a phase, someone who would eventually be replaced by a more suitable partner of Eleanor's choosing. "Sarah is my family now, Mom," James said quietly but firmly. "She has been for 5 years. If you want to be part of our lives, both of our lives, you need to accept that." Eleanor's smile was tight, her goodbye perfunctory. As the door closed behind her, the house seemed to exhale, as if relieved to be free of her presence. "She'll never change, will she?" I asked, leaning against James as we stood in the foyer. "Probably not," he admitted, his arm around my shoulders. "But we can change how we respond to her, how much power we give her over our lives." We returned to the living room, to the photographs spread across the coffee table. Visual evidence of the life we'd built together. Imperfect, but ours. Among them was a picture from our wedding day. A moment captured when neither of us was posing for the camera. James was looking at me with such unguarded adoration that it made my heart ache to see it now. "I miss that," I said, picking up the photograph, "the way we were before everything got so complicated." James studied the image, then looked at me with the same warmth I remembered from our early days. "It's still there, Sarah. Under all the mistakes and misunderstandings and family drama. That feeling hasn't gone anywhere." He was right. Despite everything, the secrets, the tensions, Eleanor's constant presence in our marriage, the foundation remained. We loved each other. It was that simple and that complex. "So what now?" I asked, echoing the question I'd posed the night of the dinner. James considered for a moment, then smiled. A genuine smile that reached his eyes and reminded me of the man I'd fallen in love with. "Now, we redecorate." I laughed, caught off guard by the suggestion. "Redecorate? This house has been a battleground for too long," he explained. "Your grandmother's style, my mother's criticisms, our compromises that never quite satisfied either of us. Let's make it ours, completely ours, with no ghosts hanging over our decisions." It was such a perfect metaphor for the changes we needed to make in our marriage that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "I'd like that," I agreed, "though I'm keeping my grandmother's clock in the kitchen." "Of course," James nodded solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "And I'm keeping the reading chair in the study." "Deal." I extended my hand, and he took it, pulling me into an embrace instead of shaking on our agreement. As we stood there, surrounded by the tangible evidence of our shared history, I felt something settle within me. The house had been my secret, my security, my connection to a past I'd loved. But now it could be something more, a home we built together, not just with furniture and paint colors, but with honesty, respect, and the kind of love that weathers storms and emerges stronger. Eleanor would always be Eleanor. The Harrington family dynamics wouldn't change overnight, if they changed at all. But James and I had taken the first steps toward a marriage that could stand on its own, without the approval or interference of others. "I love you," I whispered against his chest, the words carrying the weight of everything we'd been through, and everything that lay ahead. "I love you too," he replied, his voice steady and sure. "No matter whose name is on the deed." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Life rarely offers those. But it was a beginning, a new foundation built on truth and mutual respect. And as we stood in the home that was now truly ours, I knew that was enough.